for the next session of our International Peace Conference, Religious Peace Building. We have a very rich resources from different cultures and representing philosophies and traditions. The opening address is by Our Royal Metropolitan Church of the East Diocese of California and Professor Pietro Amiglio, Uruguayan, Mexico, Reverend Dr. Rayapan Isaac, Cape Comorin, from Cape Comorin CSI Diocese, South India. Megad Badir, Egypt, a Coptic. He will reflect on the experience with COVID and reflect on the religious peace issues. Professor Dalton Reimer, Fresno, he was teaching at the State University of California. Also, he ran a Peace Institute for several years in Fresno, and a writer and peace activist. Then Dr. Heather Davich, he had several years education experience with the Global Seed Foundation and Montessori Religious Education. And he lived in several places in the United States, in India, and she traveled a lot and had involvement in several educational traditions. So these are our panel members. First, I would like to invite Mar Ava Royal for his opening address.
Thank you, Father. Can you hear me well? Is
Yes.
my audio okay?
Yes.
With you and with all of the esteemed panel that's present here today for this conference. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great joy for me to be a participant in this international conference on peace and the building of peace in our world today, and especially the role that religion has to play in all of this. I greet all of you far and near, and I hope that this conference has been a most successful one, and that the deliberations which have been taking place these days will be fruitful for all who are concerned. This fourth session of the conference is dedicated to discussing the role of religion in the building of peace in the world in general, and among men and women who hold to religion in particular. There is no doubt that religion as a whole preaches peace and aims at promoting peace in human society. Every generation of humanity attests to this fact. In fact, 84% of the world's population today adheres to some form of religion or another. So the tendency of the world historically and in our very own days to subscribe to or submit to the authority of God, or a concept of God that varies among the religions. This statistic is, in truth, quite encouraging. Why is that? For the simple reason that it means we have a standard of measurement of morality or ethics, whatever you will, and values that are beyond our own standards. It is presumed that the standard comes from above to humanity, and therefore we are to live up to such a divinely inspired standard of moral living, thinking, and acting. And yet the role of religion is not simply confined to the propagation of teachings or doctrines, or merely even to a moral code of conduct and right living, what we often call religious values. But rather, religion allows for a proper and healthy interaction between humans and human societies. It allows us to go beyond ourselves and to look towards the good of, quote, the other. In a word, religion allows us to begin to conquer the ego and the selfishness that often drives human beings to act the way they do. This cannot be truer when we contextualize religion in the framework of peace promotion in human adversity, strife, and conflict. The role of religion can, and yes, it ought to be, the building and promoting of peace among men and women. In the Christian faith, we believe that the Lord Jesus Christ is the Prince of Peace, and these are one of the messianic titles given to Christ by the prophet Isaiah in Isaiah 9:6. We also read in the Gospels that the heavenly hosts proclaimed peace at the birth of Christ in Bethlehem, saying, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace and goodwill to men." Luke 2:14. Thus, for us, particularly as Christians, peace is a blessed state that begins with and is initiated by God Himself, and it is extended to all of His creatures by His own goodwill and His love for us. And again, each religion proclaims peace to its own followers in a given and in a distinct way. The role of religion, therefore, is to promote and to create an atmosphere that will nurture peace among man and human society. Sadly, oftentimes in our human history, religion has been a source of conflict rather than peace. This is true of every religion without distinction. In fact, it is recorded that since 2015, so just within the last 5 years, some 35 major world conflicts were based on religion or were caused by religious identity. However, when we are able to go beyond doctrine, confessionalism, and the rigid exclusion of the rest of humanity, it is only then that religion can be a promoter of peace. It is a strange fact that in many parts of the world today that are ridden by war and strife, oftentimes religion is the cause. And yet, by the same token, many a time religion steps up into the middle of a conflict between nations and between peoples in order to create and to bring about peace. As history has demonstrated time after time, religious actors are successful and neutral agents of bridge building, conflict solving, and reconciliation. And why is that? Because the religious actor is able to step out of the political and the social construct and context that has either given birth to or has nurtured a particular conflict. Religious actors can be genuine and long lasting agents of peace and understanding between conflicting sides. As such, women and men of a religious position and standing can be, more often than not, those who bring about concrete solutions to peace within a given conflict. In recent studies, it is said that there are three basic models of the role of religion in peace building. First, that peace can come about through religion alone. That means where devotion to one given religion will bring about world peace. Second, that peace ought to exist or can exist without religion. And this, in fact, is the antithesis of the first model, a secular form of peace building that does not rely in any way on religion as such. Thirdly, there is peace with religion, and this emphasizes the importance of the interfaith dialogue movement and the coexistence of multiple religions among humanity. Oftentimes, these occur in the form of NGOs, non governmental organizations, which are more often than not faith based and which aim at constructing peace at the local level. In addition, they provide for a moral voice or a moral authority in areas of conflict where peace is greatly needed. I believe personally that this third model is one that the majority of us can agree to. For while giving religion its due consideration and place within human society, it stresses the importance of two factors. First and foremost, of dialogue between peoples of different and diverse faiths, and secondly, of coexistence. These elements are indispensable for religion, for any religion really, to properly and fruitfully play its role in the promotion of peace among and in the context of conflict and diversity, or adversity rather. Each and every religion must ensure that it will be a promoter of a respectful and genuine dialogue among the members of other religions, and that the ideal of human coexistence, even with those who are not our co religionists, can be and will be adequately promoted. When we lose sight of these two fundamental elements for peace and the building of peace among nations and peoples, then we truly lose sight of what religion can do in order to build and to promote peace on an international level. It is my sincere hope that we can all, that is, the whole of the human family, can commit to these ideals. And in so doing, we will not only be serving our own particular religion, but we will allow religion and religious ideas as such to be at the service of global peace and harmony among all men and women. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have two more people in this session. That is Professor Marianne Patna and Sulu San from the GTU community. Can you speak, Sulu? Can you speak now? Please also introduce a little more. I couldn't introduce you properly. Please link.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Now.
Okay.
Please introduce yourself a little more.
Okay. Yeah. My name is Zulu Nangsang Lemtur, but it's a very long name. Call me Zulu. I'm from India. I come from a state called Nagaland, and I'm currently a third-year PhD student at Graduate Theological Union, and I'm working on a project on how indigenous people's traditions can also add to the wider climate for interfaith dialogue and peace building. Yeah, Professor Marian, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, you speak.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Gregois and Professor Marian, for giving me the opportunity to moderate this session, and I'm extremely happy to have this honor. And good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the fourth session of our conference. Today, we have a very important topic, which is religious building. And we have many distinguished panels who will present us this topic and help us under the different layers in addressing this issue. I think this topic is one of the most pertinent issues that pertains to our societies across the globe. And to brief this topic, let me begin with a statement from Rudolf Otto, who states, "Religion is an ambiguous enterprise because it commands the authority to kill and to heal, to unleash terror or to please." So the ambivalence of religion is such that sometimes it tends to endorse violence as an instrument for self-defense and also the encouragement of religious norms. And on the other hand, religion also supports nonviolence and advocates tolerance and love. Thus, we can see that religion is both the bearer of peace and also the bearer of the sword, and which also has the ability to bless or to kill. Therefore, the important question for us is, how do we define and understand the sacred? Or when we think of the word religion, what do we understand? I think religious experience has been defined as the quest for the ultimate reality. And in pursuing this quest, religion often seems to have inherent claims for uniqueness and universality. Many religion exhibits an inner tendency to claim themselves as the true religion. And today, every religion, like every culture, is an existential possibility offered to every people. And different religion has become a part of our everyday life, and we experience them as a challenge to the truth claim of our own faith and an unconscious emphasis on human efforts and also the ideas and the nature and efficacy of salvation become interwoven with truth claims and the uniqueness of religion. And this phenomenon has given rise to religious tension and has divided the society around religious lines. And under such influence of assumptions, presuppositions, odious comparison, fears, and conflicts, religion's credence to bring the world to the brink of annihilation. Also, when we talk about religion, another crucial issue is the politics of religious identity, which is based on a system whereby people privilege their belongingness to a particular religion as a source of identity that set them against another religious tradition, and also the politics of majority and minority. And in the process, religious groups build walls and borders around themselves to protect and defend their identity over against their rivals or people of other faith. Now, as we strive to identify and relate ourselves, it may be easy for all of us to say who we are not. For instance, we may say, we are not them. And many a times we are tempted to label others, we are good and they are bad. We are right and they are wrong. And history of religious conflicts has reminded us how dangerous it is to stigmatize others who are unlike us. And this approach has in turn divided societies along religious lines and erect barriers to peace and unity. Also, the danger lies when zealots and devout adherents elevate teachings and beliefs of their own faith traditions to the level of absolute claims, and they open a door of possibility of violent extremism. These views clearly proves that religion can be dangerous when its multifaceted natures become interwoven with politics, social, and other human dimensions. So, in the midst of all these religious conflicts, the question lingers: is religion the problem, or is religion a viable solution to these conflicts and for peace building? Why are religious communities whose holy scriptures advocate peace engage in wars and conflicts? Why do they not focus on teachings of scriptures like love, kindness, tolerance, acceptance? Or how does one's engagement affect the way of people's understanding and perceptions of oneself over against the people of other faith? I think these are critical questions, and there are no easy and ready-made answers to them. And I think it is command to address that religion as a source of conflict rather than peace. However, the answer lies within us. Either we break peace or we make peace. And it is important for us to bridge the barriers which have separated the religion, or our sincerity and voicelessness will only bring the world to total chaos and destruction. I think there's a need to reinterpret religion in its teaching so that we are without ambiguity, misconceptions, and manipulations. Then religion can serve as the basis for wholeness of being. We need to deconstruct and reconstruct religious traditions to locate a way in changing context for these religious principles to transform and liberate people. What is needed is to understand that true religions speak not of war, but urges the promise of peace, love, justice, and oneness. And we need to look deeper into these traditions for clarity and guidance along the paths toward peace and justice. And this is what our team today seeks to answer. And with this briefing, we have many distinguished panelists in our midst, and you'll be uncovering these different types and typologies and methods on how we can talk about religious peace building. And I would like to introduce our first panelist, who is Pedro Ameglio Uruguayan from Mexico. Sir, can you please take your time and present your paper?
Thank you very much, uh, Lulu. And if thank you. Is Professor Pietro Ameglio is sign up.
Yes,
Please. Welcome.
you listen well.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to think out loud, to share, and to learn. Um, I live and work in Mexico. I was born in Uruguay, in South America, but it's 40 years I live and work in Mexico in two ways. One, as a professor in National University, I coordinated a peace and nonviolent program for all the country. And I also have been in my life in the middle of social activist actions for long years. So, in these two senses, I would like to share some experiences, real, where I am inside with my body now in Mexico. And a first important thing I think is to understand that Gandhi is perhaps very named, but very little known. And not only Mexico, I've been in other countries of Latin America, and Gandhi and his experience and his ways of struggle, and also that part of nonviolent culture is not much known, but it's practiced in many ways without the clear conscious, the clear awareness. And in Mexico, the name we give to nonviolence is social resistance or civil resistance, sometimes Pacific civil resistance. The indigenous people in our country living here, we call it Lekil Kushlehal. It's a way of understanding what nonviolence in an integral way means. And it's important because using the word nonviolence, it's my experience for 35 years, creates a lot of problems in the language and in our culture because people understand that it's opposite to every way of violence, and we understand it's not the sense. So, in that sense, I would like to share that the title of the forum is challenging because it speaks about Gandhi today. At least I understand it like that. And in that sense, um, today is a very special day in Mexico because it's the anniversary of the biggest violent social action in the contemporary story of our country, the 2 October of 1968, where there was a massacre of thousands of students and trade union and workers in a square in the center of our capital named Tlatelolco. So, as we know in the things we live, we teach, we must know lot of non-violence and of violence, lot of peace and of war, because they are phases of, of the same reality. And it's significant this date in our country. And also, I want to share, because it's a kind of religious space, that today is 25 years that died one of the most important persons that brought the idea modern of nonviolence in Mexico. I've met. He was a Maryknoll priest called Donald Hessler, a very committed with poor, with social struggle priest that lived more than 40 years in Mexico. And he introduced and taught many of us for decades in nonviolence, and he had one idea that it's very important, I think, and it was like this: nonviolence is the most violent of violences, but it doesn't try to destroy the other. It tries to build a change in the other, to touch his mind, his heart, his body. And that is a thing that perhaps many of us that have been in social struggles we can understand, because many adversaries in the struggle think that we are violent because we try to touch their moral identity, to break something inside of them for a change. So, this is a complex idea of what in social struggle is direct nonviolent action, I think. And he also said, this priest, uh, something that I think is very important for us, that he taught from a Mexican history of Guadalupe, the Virgin of Guadalupe, Mary. The two main characteristics of nonviolence are to be humble and to have audacity. And we can share things about that because we think it works in reality. Well, leaving this, I want to share first thing the reality principle of our country that is crossed by a hard war most of the last 10 years, 12 years, with more than 250,000 people dead. It's completely wrong to call it a drug war. It's not at all that. And we have 77,000 disappeared people in 10 years. Is a country in the world with more disappeared people in the last years. So, in this sense, I would like to share uh, one group that has a lot of Gandhian roots in his ways of action, with whom I've been working more than 10 years, that are the relatives of disappeared people. There are hundreds of these groups in all over the country. We work in a net that is called National Links, with more than 70 groups all over the country, with relatives of disappeared and murdered people in the last 10 years. And we also work inside of that organization in something that it's called Churches for Peace. And the important thing of this experience, because I don't want to take too much time, there is much to speak about, is the way of non-cooperation action. That I think it's a main idea of Gandhi, and it's one of the main ways to struggle in our country against the high level of violence. They have been starting a change from victims to social activists, human rights defenders in these years. They started as victims and now they are social activists in a very nonviolent way. It has been very hard, this change in their lives, in their identities, because they understood that the state wasn't going to find their relatives disappeared. So they started a non cooperation action without asking permission to the state. And that, I think, is one of the most deep ways of understanding Gandhism in Mexico today. They started understanding that the power is in them, in their organization, and not in the state if they take away that blind obedience to the state. So they started uh, building um, brigades to search clandestine graves all over the country. Uh, this is, and also another part that is the forensic identification struggle. These two struggles are the most deep way of social struggle nonviolent today in Mexico. They found thousands of pieces of bodies. That's very hard because as a forensic work in identification is very slowly, many times they have a little piece of bone, but they don't know if it's of their relative. So that creates a deeper pain. It's a very complex situation. And the leadership they have is also very collective, very horizontal. And that's an important thing of how they work. And they use a principle that for us is very important to define nonviolence. And we work inside of these groups, and it's that for us, nonviolence is building a kind of due disobedience to unhuman orders. That's what we teach in university, in workshops with activists, with relatives of disappeared people, how to be able to disobey unhuman orders in every moment of the social life and individual life. It's the most deep thing we try to build. It's not easy. We learn a lot from activism, and we try to advance in that. And in that sense, it's also important to understand that in many of these states where are the brigades of searching clandestine graves, the church has been, all the churches, some, not all, have been near the families, the relatives. And that's a very important thing because churches belong to a non-violent tool, very important in social struggle, that we call moral reserve. And hierarchy has a social power that is important for these relatives, for their security, and for making pressure over authority, political authorities, and also over delictive gangs, because the social power of churches can make them have less impunity. So we have had situations where bishop, bishops, nuns, priests, and lay people walked together with the relatives in the field, in the land, digging the land for searching bones, putting their bodies inside of actions that have some proportion with the level of violence we confront. That's for us an important idea about nonviolent struggle. It must have a proportion with the level of violent actions. Otherwise, is a kind of simulation because you can't find graves only with media interviews. You must put your body in the street and in the public situations, making more pressure to the authority. And another important action of churches, for example, in the brigades, nonviolent brigades, is that in the mass or in the religious celebrations of Sunday or Saturday, many of them put boxes, anonymous boxes, where people can put a paper writing some information they have about clandestine graves. It's a very dangerous situation to tell publicly where there is a clandestine grave because gangs will kill you immediately. So, in an anonymous way, people put a little paper in some boxes closed, and after the mass and the religious celebration, the relatives open the box and see information that has been very important for knowing where are the clandestine graves because our land is very, very big, full of accidents in the land, and it's very difficult to find and know where there are bodies. Another little thing, 1 minute, I want also to share is that I and some other persons in Latin America, we are part of an initiative of Pax Christi International and the Catholic Nonviolent Initiative about trying to build a kind of encyclical of Pope uh, Francis about nonviolence. It's a process from 2016. There are two documents about making acting nonviolent in our church and in our lives. And it's, I think, a prophetical way that trying to make church recuperate its prophetical role in justice and dignity in our societies, passing from just war to just peace, trying to explore the roots about Jesus' life and to push that in world society and in our countries, no? Well, I think here is this first sharing for me.
Thank you very much, Professor Pietro. Our next speaker is Reverend Dr. Rayappan Isaac. He is a pastor in Cape, South India, Cape Comorin, that is the southernmost point of India, very close to Indian Ocean. He is working in the Church of South India for about more than a decade, and he's a scholar, as well as he's working with the people, low income group, and has so many social economic projects. And now I would like to welcome Rayappan Isaac.
Good afternoon to all from Kanyakumari, South India. I am privileged to be participate in this webinar with you and wish all the organizers, especially Father Kuriakos Achan, for allowing me as one of the speakers of this webinar. Indian society is a coexistence society rather than a single society. Many groups, castes, and religions living together, but interacting among each other only at the margin. Indian Constitution says, any citizen in India has freedom to profess, practice, and propagate any religion they like without any government interference. Considering the pluralistic nature of our country, the leaders who framed the Constitution had structured it carefully for harmonious living. This secular constitution is one of the best results of our freedom struggle, especially our father of nation, Gandhiji. While the constitution and all other democratic structures protect the secular fabric of India, people still find difficulties seeing those ideals realistically in life. The pluralistic life of the people was under threat today because of the various communal issues. Our country, India, is not like the same which Gandhiji lived and visioned. I would like to say three important issues which seriously affect the secular character of India today. The first one is non-separation of politics from religion. Second one, continued widespread communalism and communal violence in several parts of the country, which lead to many deaths. Third one, banning of cow slaughter, leading to curtailment of freedom of persons to eat and restricting their freedom to carry on any profession and trade. Communalism is still a powerful force in India. The challenges of casteism, communalism, and religious fundamentalism involving separatism in India are the major threats to our secular state. They weaken the working and stability of our democratic secular federal state and militate against the basic principles governing our national life and providing means to our new identity. Addressing a gathering, our former Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, said, secular values of the country are in danger. There are powers trying to divide people. If they succeed, they would harm the nation in a big way. Today, the democratic credentials of the Indian polity, as well as the unity and integrity of the nation, are challenged because of the rising religious intolerance and the communal riots. Communalism is not only identified with one community or a particular religion, all the communities and the religious denominations in India are influenced by it. In the pre independence India, there was also a history of communal issues. However, the intensity of rioting only increased during the post independence period. To effectively perform the peace building, one of our church leaders, J.T.K. Daniel, recommends three strategies. They are: one is Christ's presence in the religio cultural renaissance has to be acknowledged. Second one, discarding sectarian aspirations, cultural renaissance has to be evaluated with Christ's spirit of love, compassion, and humanity. To present Christ as the source of power that redeems cultures from the powers that do violence and set up walls of partitions. Apart from these three stages, I want to present some practical suggestions. They are: first one, practice hospitality rather than hostility. Second one, build bridges instead of walls. Third one, be an inclusive community. Fourth one, engage more in the liberation activities. Fifth one, promote grassroots peace building. Sixth one, hold hands with other faith groups. And the seventh one, avoid talking ill of other religion. Our father of nation, Gandhiji, universally known as an apostle of peace and non-violence. Gandhiji himself made a skillful use of satyagraha to achieve peace and harmony. According to him, the root of every violence and conflict is untruth, and that the only permanent solution of conflict is the truth. Consequently, to resolve conflicts, he conceived of a practical technique which he called satyagraha. Literally, it means satya and agraha, or unwavering search for the truth. And since the only way of getting to truth is by non-violence, it follows that satyagraha implies an unwavering search for the truth using non-violence. Therefore, Gandhi emphasized satyagraha as the most potent method of ensuring an endurable peace. Truth and non-violence are the twin principles of Gandhi's peace. In authoritarian societies, whether religious or political, where votes of people do not count, where any opposition voice is silenced with bullets and imprisonment, peace cannot be permanent. Having political power is therefore just the first step towards peace. We have to accept the responsibility to change things. We have a responsibility to cultivate some of the principles to look at sharing and ensuring that resources are distributed equitably. We must ensure that people can see and feel the change and be able to identify a place for themselves in the world. In addition to political oppression, we have economic, intellectual, religious, environmental, and gender oppression all over the world. When people talk about peace, they cannot view the indiscriminate killings and destruction of property in isolation from the property, illiteracy, religious intolerance, environmental threats, and gender oppression faced by the people. Youth should know that social harmony is an index of peace. They should strive peacefully to make their and other people's social lives happy and undisturbed, which is the aim of any society. Gandhi also warned youngsters against misinterpreting religions. All the religions have preached peace and harmony so that society can enjoy a happy and peaceful life. Gandhi stated that non-violence is the rule of conduct for a society if it is to live consistently with the human dignity and make total progress towards the attainment of peace. Peace in the world cannot be achieved without understanding the concept and techniques of Gandhi. Therefore, it is important to understand his techniques and try to replace the present techniques which advocate violence all over the world. Peace is more than the absence of war. True peace is justice. True peace is freedom. And true peace dictates the recognition of human rights. Change in the attitude and behavior can be achieved through formal and informal peace education. Peace education can promote the development of an authentic consciousness that is necessary to change attitude and behavior in order to achieve greater cooperation and peaceful problem solving. People in power, whether political, economic, religious, civic, or administrative power, need to develop a holistic view of peace. We need to build a culture of nonviolence among our children and youth through actively ensuring that we do not support war ties or violent gains, media, books, stories, etc., but instead promote a culture of resistance to injustice. Two ways in which religions can facilitate greater peace is through the common benefits of group membership and the power of interfaith dialogue for conflict resolution. I want to conclude my presentation with a quote from former US President Barack Obama when he received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2009. I just A just peace includes not only civic and political rights, it must encompass economic security and opportunity. For true peace is not just freedom from fear, but freedom from want. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reverend Rayapan. I know it is after midnight in India. Really, you
Yes.
burn the midnight lamp. So thank you. Our next speaker is Magad Badir from Egypt. We are very happy to hear Badir experience or COVID experience with the Coptic and other that past years. Egypt was had many religious problems, and really religious peace building is necessary a lot. So, Magad, can you please share with us your experience. Is he around? Magat? Okay, then I would like to welcome Professor Dalton Reimer. He is coming from Fresno. He had also very good experience living in different parts of the world as a missionary, and he ran a Peace Institute in Fresno for several years, now retired. Still, he is very active, writing books and involved in peace building. Please, now, Professor Dalton.
Thank you. Coming through?
Yes, we can
hear me.
We can hear, yeah.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to contribute. Appreciate the invitation. In 1990, I was privileged to co-found the Center for Peacemaking and Conflict Studies at my university, Fresno Pacific University in Fresno, California. One of the dominant emphases in our work at the Center for Peacemaking has been in restorative justice. We have trained people and worked in developing models of community restorative justice, particularly focusing on victim offender reconciliation programs. And so I've had a good deal of experience with that kind of work. Deeply rooted, of course, in religious traditions. My university is a church-related university, and so we found our work on the biblical teachings of Scripture, applying that. One of my particular interests has been the relationship between sacred text and peacemaking. I've had the privilege of teaching and speaking on 5 different continents of this world, and find that when speaking in religious context, if one bases one's teaching and work on Scripture, one has a very quick and ready identification, a common base from which to work. And so the religious traditions of the world suggest that people around the world are very much motivated by texts that they hold to be sacred. We know that Gandhi was very involved in what today we would call interfaith dialogue. And he drew on many traditions. He was particularly inspired and motivated, however, by the Gita of his own particular tradition. But people draw on the text that they know, the text that they are familiar with. Muslims find inspiration in the Quran, Jews in the Hebrew Bible, Christians in what the Christians call the Old Testament and the New Testament. There are some of the texts, however, that cross religious boundaries, and I want to just share briefly one such text that has been significant for people, particularly those in what is called the Abrahamic religions of the world, Islam, Jews, and Christians. And that text comes from the book of Genesis, a book that is held as significant and sacred in all 3 of those particular traditions. And one of the early stories in that particular book is the story of Cain and Abel. We're all familiar, I'm sure, with that particular story. And what happens in the conversation between God and Cain when he is confronted for his murder of his brother Abel is a dialogue in which Cain basically denies responsibility for caring for his brother. And when he is confronted by God in terms of his denial, God says to Cain, your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground. We find that in Genesis 4, verse 10. But what is interesting in that particular text is that the word blood in the Hebrew is in the plural rather than the singular. In English translations, at least, it is usually translated in the singular. But the ancient rabbis, noting that it was in the plural, coined an interesting phrase. And their phrase based on that particular text was, he who takes one life, takes the world entire. He who saves one life, saves the world entire. Well, that text or that interpretation of that text today is usually divorced from its source in the book of Genesis, and it has taken on a life of its own. So, for example, I have heard a Holocaust survivor quote that particular text, particularly in its rendition, he who saves one life saves the world entire. It is quoted in Oskar Schindler's, the novel on Oskar Schindler's factory where he employed Jewish workers during the Holocaust, saving their lives. And that apparently was quoted to Schindler at one point and served, as some have speculated, as speculation perhaps for why he did what he did. So here we have an interesting text. But what was interesting, though the Jewish rabbis coined that phrase, and one finds it in that historic Jewish collection of biblical interpretations called the Mishnah and the Jerusalem and Babylonian commentaries, the Talmuds of the Mishnah. It also found its way, interestingly, into the Quran. And so in the Cain and Abel story, as interpreted in the Quran, in Surah 5, verse 32, you have that phrase restated, he who saves one life saves the world entire. What's interesting is that that particular passage has provided motivation not only for survivors of the Holocaust as they reflect on their experience, but now has become a model drawn from the Quran for the White Helmets group in Syria that has saved thousands and thousands of lives as they have come to the rescue of people who have suffered from the bombing of Syrian forces. And so their motto now has become taken not from the Mishnah, from the Jewish tradition, but taken from the Quran. And so their motto has become one of whoever saves a life saves all of humanity. What that suggests is that sacred texts sometimes cross religious boundaries and can become a kind of unifying force, a unifying motivation for working harmoniously in the interest of peace. Another particular text that apparently was very significant in the Irish conflict of several years ago was the Hebrew text that speaks about the stranger in the land. Stranger in the land, which became a kind of unifying thing between Catholics and Protestants in that Irish situation conflict. So I would simply point out that in terms of the use of sacred text, those texts can sometimes become a unifying force. As has already been commented, religion sometimes becomes a source of conflict. And even this particular phrase from the Mishnah and the Quran has also a potential for dividing, to be a divisive kind of thing. For in that particular text, as stated in the Quran, for example, it is stated that he who saves one life, or he who takes one life, and then it says, except for corruption in the land or murder. Well, corruption in the land can be read in various ways. And those who have moved toward terrorism have sometimes justified their actions by their view that there is corruption in the land, as sometimes viewed as outside forces that happen to be occupying or presence in a country and not very welcome. So it can go both ways. But on the other hand, that phrase, he who saves one life saves all of humanity or saves the world entire, can still serve as a powerful force for working cooperatively across religious boundaries in the interest of peace. So I simply share that as one example of how sacred texts have been a force sometimes for good, even across religious boundaries. So thank you. That's my comment and contribution.
Thank you, Professor Dalton. Now, our next speaker is Heather Davids of Global Seed Organization and Montessori Religious Education. She will share her experience with COVID-19. Davids? Davids, are you here? I heard she had a link problem, connection problem, internet connection problem she had. So now I will ask Sister Marianne, and we have the discussion now. If any one of you in the panel or outside would like to bring any issues now, can bring, and Sulu also can join with Marianne for the discussion. So you can have.
Great. I'm going to ask Zulu to navigate us through the panel discussion. And I don't want to usurp this time right now. I'll open it up for people to respond to our panelists. And Zulu, if you can navigate us with that. And then I think Father Tom created a good precedent. If you'd like to speak, then please text Zulu and he'll make sure that your microphone is opened up. And when there's a chance, I do have a few comments, but I would like, first of all, to give the platform for people to respond to what we just heard. And thank you, everyone. So Zulu, take it away.
Thank you. I think we had a nice panel of discussion today, and like they have touched every aspects of our life vis-a-vis religion. And I think some of the important themes that come out through this presentation was the issue of non-violence in the social spectrum, the social struggle and social actions, and also the whole concept of water lobby, like to be humble and to have that authenticity. And also we have heard about the different approaches to peace, like to be hospitality, building bridges, being inclusive, and also how to promote peace at grassroots level. We also talk about the liberation aspects and also the aspects of how to avoid ill talks. And also we have heard about how to use scripture as a source of restorative justice and also the unifying force that would enable to work cooperatively towards religious building. I think these are some of the core concepts that have come through this discussion. And now I would like to open the time to the floor to raise any questions. And we have uh, one from Azriel. I wish to take a minute. So Azriel, go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Thanks all of the presenters, very instructive. Pietro, muchas gracias. I want to focus on one point. When we are honoring Gandhi today, when we take Satyagraha and Ahimsa, truth and non-violence, then I'm reflecting about the phenomenon of the normalcy of lies. Today, President Trump is an expert. They count how many lies per minute or per hour or per day. Uh, and this kind of lying is reflected in Brazil with Bolsonaro. Um, I don't want to offend, nationalistic feelings, but I think Modi is also doing that kind of message that is not what you would call truthful, but rather they are lies or half lies that polarize the language of conspiracies, of hate, of racism. And, and they are becoming accepted by many people prepared to vote for this kind of populist leaders. So confronting that reality, which is a very dangerous reality, he was speaking about tolerance, was speaking about love, and we're seeing a pandemic of lies, not only in the media and social media, but in the highest authorities, in the presidents and their followers. So my question, my provocation is to the speakers, how should the church, um, the voice of the church, um, thinking of what Pietro said, of equivalence between the violence that is there and how we respond to it. How can today religions confront this horizon, these pandemics of public lies? So that's my question to all the panelists.
Thank you.
Yes, the panelists, could you kindly respond to the question from Azrael? Would you like to respond? Okay, Rapan.
Uh, I feel church has a greater responsibility to respond to this situation, especially to peace building and in the context of communalism and so on. So I feel if the church follows the principles of Jesus or its ideals, it can be shown to the world that it is uh, practicing the things which it teaches. Especially, usually what we do is, I am speaking my context as well as in my previous job, I was in a Pacific country, and comparing both, I feel that church is not truthful to its teaching. It's only teaches but not practices. So if it practices its teaching, we can make real changes in the world. And we could also see all the things we have talking in the world also could be seen in the churches. So people cannot find any truthfulness in its teaching. So that's my answer for that.
Thank you, Rapan. And Professor Petro? Yes?
Yes, following Rayapan idea that it's a very Gandhian idea to preach with the example, uh, two little actions thinking out loud now to answer as real. That would be for me a kind of prophetical way to show and audacity and humble. For example, some bishops walking close in the marches of Black Lives Matter, but walking with them in the street. Second, for pandemia, that's for racism. For pandemia, for example, opening some parishes as public health spaces for attending ill people with also economical resources. So putting money also in that of the community. There are little humble examples, but show how church is in the middle of this commitment, no, a real commitment. They are kind of little prophetical signs. We can speak much, no? Okay.
Okay. Kavya, you have a question? Please unmute. Kavya, can you hear us? Can you unmute your microphone? Oh, yes.
Hello,
Yes.
I'm Kavya from India, and rather than questioning the panelists, I'd like to comment on a very small um like concept that most of us didn't point out to. So, so I feel that religion can work as both a motivator or a catalyst in bringing peace, and religion only becomes a problem when we give meaning to the segregations. So what we need to keep in mind is that gratitude is the basis of all religions. So I am thankful for my life, the privileges and opportunities that I am provided with, and I'd be equally grateful if everybody else got the same chances as I do. So that there is also one Almighty whom we've accepted in different forms and names across the world. As long as we can accept this idea, as Father Royal mentioned earlier, can we proceed to coexist and move forward towards dialogue and coexistence, which can promote peace of the self and the world and the larger harmony.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your feedback and comments. Is there any other questions from the floor? As you think about it, I also have a question, and maybe this might be this Professor Dalton can answer this question, but also like Professor Raipan and Petro can also raise this question. I think one of the perennial problems of religious violence is the misuse and misinterpretation of sacred texts. So, in such a context, like what are some of the hermeneutical principles or tools that you would suggest that that a text can talk about peace rather than war?
So you're focusing that question to me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Well, the question of hermeneutics is a complicated one. And I'm not a theologian, and I would defer to theologians who can reflect on this better. One of the things, though, that interests me is the function of narrative, the function of story. There is a social scientist that says that most human behavior is learned by modeling through observation. In other words, we see in others. So we see in Gandhi, for example, a particular way of working. We see his understanding of truth, which he held with a great deal of humility, noting that, and this relates to his whole notion of suffering, noting that we all have held to certain ways of thinking at times that have later turned out to be wrong. And this is why I think in Gandhian context, he was open to conversation with others in a mutual search for truth. And I come from the Mennonite tradition, if you're familiar with that, which is part of the what is sometimes referred to as the Radical Reformation. And one of the basic hermeneutical principles of that particular tradition is what is sometimes referred to as the hermeneutic of community. People sitting around a text, for example, around a table with the text, so to speak, in the middle and mutually reflecting on the text. There is one particular notion in the biblical tradition that says where two or three are gathered together, there's a deep suspicion of the individual alone. And I think if I would lift up one particular principle, hermeneutical principle, and that finds expression in various contexts, in the Latin American context, other contexts, where it is the community that gathers together to reflect on particular text and particular scripture. So when we gather together in community, in what is called a hermeneutic and community, and I would suggest that Gandhi, though he didn't use that particular language, also reflected that particular concept. So in confronting the British, for example, he invited the British into conversation. One of the misconceptions, for example, in the United States, in terms of the civil rights movement, that it began in the South with a demonstration, with a bus boycott, and that's not true. It began with an invitation to the City Council of Montgomery to enter into a conversation to resolve the issue of discrimination on buses. And in fact, what happened in that particular context is the Black community was prepared to accept a resolution that was less, actually, where they suggested that instead of a hard line between in the middle of the bus, whites could start sitting from the front and the blacks from the back, but there would be no hard line in between, so that blacks were sitting in the back and the front of the bus was totally empty. But the City Council of Montgomery was not willing to engage in the conversation, even as the British in India were not always willing to engage Gandhi in conversation. So one person who has interpreted Gandhi in terms of approach has suggested what this person calls a stepwise approach. You start with an invitation to conversation. You sit down together in mutual discernment, which I think is a reflection of what, in my tradition at least, has been referred to as a hermeneutic of community. So when one sits around the sacred text where two or three are gathered together, I think in terms of biblical, the Bible's own understanding of hermeneutics is probably a very good place to begin.
Thank you. Any other comments or remarks that anybody wants to make on that?
Professor Dalton, I do appreciate what you just shared. I mean, indeed, we see that in the Catholic Christian community, especially in liberation theology, it was the basic Christian communities gathered together, reflecting on the text that was a source of empowerment for them. And in a way of realizing for themselves the transformation that God was calling them to personally, and the way that they needed to witness to it in the social and political world. So yes, it's the idea of really our doing our best to read the text, to pray over the text, and to find ways that our community lives those texts. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Azriel, you can go ahead.
Hello?
Yes.
I
Go
don't
ahead.
want to use time. So 2 short points. Don Samuel Ruiz, who was a bishop in Chiapas, he would say, you know, we don't want to destroy you capitalist, you oppressor. We want to liberate you from the role of being an oppressor. Was a loving provocation saying, I'm not against you. I am against you being an oppressor. And would be liberating for you to stop being a capitalist oppressor. He had to leave Chiapas because he was threatened, but he did his work. And related to that, and I like very much what Pietro said, the mixture of humbleness and audacity. Um, this yin yang mixture of dialogue and dialectics, and Freire used both, and theology of liberation, Gustavo Gutierrez used both. Dialogue is one to one, the opening of hearts, but dialectics is a way to look at systemic structural violence, what Gandhi called it. So you could combine a critical look of society because of being structural violence and oppressive and exploitive. At the same time, that one to one, you can start a dialogue with people having complete different views. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from the floor?
Can we close in 3 minutes?
Okay.
We can make comments. Yeah. If you want to reflect.
Okay, Professor Rayapan, you have raised your hand, so please go ahead.
Like the madam which who presented just before the participant, that in addition to the liberation theology, I also want to emphasize the praxis-oriented theology. That may be a hermeneutical tool which could enable people to practice religion in their own life. Because nowadays we couldn't find people, those who follows the real teachings of Jesus. If one follows his teaching and practice everything in their life, then it could be a good model.
Thank you. I think our time is already up. So let me just, I'd like to thank all the panelists for your wonderful presentations, and also to all the folks who have also contributed to these rich discussions. And since we're talking about Kanti, let me just give a quote of Kanti, which he said, "An eye for an eye would make the whole world go blind." And I think that speaks volumes when you talk about religious violence. So just to sum up, I think each religious tradition has its distinctive characteristics and a proper understanding of other faith tradition. And it is possible only if we reconcile and try to see the brighter side of other traditions with openness. And also, each faith tradition has a lot to offer, and one belonging to one faith can draw on what other faiths offer. And I think this enriching from one another can be possible in the process of mutual adaptation and religious tolerance. I think, therefore, the need of this hour in a pluralistic society is the commitment to pull down the barriers and borders and sharing of faith amidst diversity. I think we need tolerance, love, and openness while relating to other traditions, and a sense of thankfulness and appreciations. And I think these, I believe, would go a long way in our quest to create in the religious community the harbinger of unity, peace, and pleasantness. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Slu. I would like to wind up the session, and also this is the last session in the Greenland group, and we are taking a long break, and because in other parts of the world it is after midnight, so we will take a 6 hours break for the concluding session. That will be both groups come together again, like in the inauguration session. So Professor Asil had a problem in the beginning, but he made it. Now we are very comfortable. He is in Sweden, and first 10-15 minutes we had struggled to enter to the to the conference, but after that he made it, and thank you very much. Are still taking so much struggle. I know when we are in a difficult situation, when we are far and if cannot come and involve properly, but that problem is solved. Thank you, Asil, and all other panel members. Your wonderful presentation, and it made rich and productive. And God bless you. See you for the concluding session in the evening. 6:30. Our time is 6:30. California time is 6:30. New York 9:30. Father Thomas, sir, you have to wait. You have to wake up little late today. Okay, thank you. Bye. Okay, a comedian also. Thank you. Bye bye.